The bailiff grabbed her arm before anyone even looked up. Not violently. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough to make one thing clear: she didn't belong there. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the entrance." The words came out flat. Practiced. Automatic. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Because moments like this happened all the time. People were redirected. Corrected. Removed quietly before they became a disruption. Naomi Carter didn't move. Not even a fraction. She stood just inside the threshold of the courthouse, where the outside air still clung faintly to the polished floor, where the world hadn't quite decided whether she was inside or out. The officer tightened his grip slightly. That was the assumption. That she would follow. That she would yield. That she would understand her place. And that was the first mistake. Because no one in that moment realized, they were putting their hands on the one person who controlled everything inside it. Officer Daniel Brooks had worked this entrance long enough to stop noticing most people. That was the thing about repetition. It didn't just make you faster. It made you certain. Certain about who needed help. Certain about who needed direction. And, more often than not, certain about who didn't belong. He had learned to read people in fragments. Shoes before faces. Posture before voice. Hesitation before intention. The ones who belonged moved differently. They didn't slow down at the door. They didn't scan the room like they were asking permission. They didn't stand at thresholds. They passed through. Like the space had already accepted them. Naomi Carter did none of those things. She stood at the edge. Not lost. Not confused. Just, still. And that stillness didn't read as confidence to Brooks. It read as uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a place like this, meant risk. Not a large one. Not dangerous. But enough to disrupt order if left alone. "I'm heading inside," she said. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't push. It simply existed. Brooks exhaled quietly through his nose. "Not like that, you're not." He didn't need to explain it. People like her didn't walk into courtrooms unannounced. They didn't stand at entrances. Like they had business inside. There was a structure to this place. Layers. Access points. Clear lines between who entered and who waited outside. And she didn't match any of them. He adjusted his stance slightly, one hand resting near his belt, not in threat, but in habit. A position he had held 1,000 times before. A position that meant, this ends here. What Brooks didn't realize, was that he had already made his decision. And once he did that, everything else became confirmation. Her clothes confirmed it. Her silence confirmed it. Her stillness confirmed it. Even the way she didn't argue, confirmed it. Because in his experience, people who belonged, pushed back. They corrected. They identified themselves. They made it clear. Naomi didn't. And to Brooks, that said everything. The city continued moving around them, unaware of the line that had just been drawn at the courthouse entrance. A bus sighed to a stop half a block away. Car horns layered faintly in the distance. Footsteps passed, some slowing, some not. But near the steps, attention began to gather. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just in fragments. A man near the curb paused longer than necessary, his hand resting loosely on his phone. A woman halfway up the steps stopped climbing, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to understand what she was looking at. Two people exiting the building slowed as they passed, their conversation dropping in volume without either of them acknowledging why. Moments like this didn't need announcements. They pulled attention quietly. Because something in them didn't feel aligned. It wasn't loud enough to be called a scene. But it wasn't invisible either. And that space in between was where curiosity lived. Naomi remained where she was. Still. Balanced. Not defensive. Not disengaged. Present in a way that didn't ask to be understood. That, more than anything, unsettled the moment. Because tension usually came with movement. Raised voices. Sharp gestures. Resistance. This had none of that. And yet, it held. The man near the curb lifted his phone slightly. Not fully recording. But close enough. A woman closer to the door leaned toward another and whispered, "Is she supposed to be there?" The other shook her head faintly. "I don't think so." A third voice, quieter, almost dismissive, "They wouldn't stop her if she belonged." That was how assumptions spread. Not through certainty. Through agreement. Small, quiet affirmations that made something feel true without ever being verified. Brooks didn't hear them. But he didn't need to. He felt the shift. The subtle pressure of being watched. Of needing to resolve the moment cleanly. Quickly. Before it stretched. Before it turned into something else. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to move along." Brooks lowered his voice slightly, as if softening the words would make them easier to accept. But the word asking didn't hold. It never did. Not in moments like this. Naomi adjusted her grip on the folder. The leather gave a faint creak under her fingers. A small sound. But in the quiet tension of the moment, it carried. "I'm going inside," she said again. Not louder. Not firmer. Just, unchanged. Brooks followed her gaze briefly, instinctively. Through the glass doors. Down the hallway beyond. Fluorescent light stretching into distance. Movement. Structure. Order. Then he shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought before it fully formed. "Yeah," he said, "and you're not part of it." This time, there was less patience in his tone. Not anger. Just certainty tightening. The kind that didn't leave room for reconsideration. Behind him, the courthouse doors reflected the scene back faintly, two figures at the threshold, one moving forward, one holding the line. The air seemed thicker there. Like the moment had slowed just enough to resist being resolved. Naomi shifted her weight slightly. Not stepping back. Not stepping forward. Just grounding herself. That, more than anything, frustrated him. Because movement he could manage. Resistance he could escalate. But stillness had no clear response. It didn't give him anything to react to. Which meant he had to decide. And once he decided, he acted. He stepped closer. Close enough that the space between them disappeared. Close enough that the moment could no longer remain neutral. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. And this time, his hand moved. Not abruptly. Not violently. But with intention. The kind that assumed the moment was already over. The kind that believed, compliance was just a step away. His fingers closed around her arm. Firm. Controlled. Final. Except, it wasn't. Because Naomi didn't move the way the moment required her to. And in that small, almost invisible refusal, the situation shifted. Not outwardly. Not yet. But enough, that something underneath it began to fracture. His grip tightened just enough to signal that the moment had moved past discussion. "We're done here," Brooks said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was a tone people recognized. The one that meant, this is no longer optional. Naomi didn't pull away. Didn't resist. But she didn't follow either. And that subtle difference created friction. The kind that didn't explode. The kind that built. The man with the phone raised it higher now, no longer pretending he wasn't recording. A woman near the steps folded her arms. That doesn't look right, she murmured. Another voice, lower, almost dismissive, they wouldn't stop her if she belonged. That was how the moment started to tilt. Not through facts. Through agreement. Brooks felt the attention now. The weight of it. Not enough to shake him. But enough to push him forward. Because hesitation, in front of a crowd, looked like uncertainty. And uncertainty was something he didn't allow. "Let's go," he said again, firmer this time. And when Naomi didn't move, he stepped slightly to the side. Adjusting his position. Preparing to guide her physically. End it cleanly. Before it stretched any further. In Brooks's mind, the situation had already been resolved. This wasn't confrontation. It was correction. He had seen dozens of moments like this. People who wandered too close to places they didn't understand. People who assumed access they didn't have. People who thought staying calm would somehow change the outcome. It never did. Order depended on consistency. Rules didn't adjust based on how quietly someone stood. They held. Or everything slipped. That was how he saw it. Not as exclusion. As structure. Not as judgment. As responsibility. And in that framework, Naomi fit into a category he had already defined. Someone who needed to be redirected. Nothing more. Nothing complicated. Except, something about her didn't align with that category. And that misalignment was beginning to press against his certainty. He noticed it in small ways. The way she didn't avoid eye contact. The way her voice didn't shift under pressure. The way she didn't explain herself. Most people did. They justified. They argued. They tried to convince. Naomi didn't. She stood. As if explanation wasn't necessary. And that made him tighten his grip slightly. Not out of aggression. But out of discomfort he couldn't name. "If you don't move," Brooks said, quieter now, "I'll have to remove you." The words landed differently. Heavier. Clearer. No longer suggestion. A line. And once that line was crossed, there was no easy return. The man with the phone adjusted his angle, stepping closer to the curb. The woman on the steps leaned forward slightly. Another voice, uncertain now, "Wait, something feels off." That hesitation spread slower than the earlier assumptions. But it spread. Because moments like this, they reached a point. A threshold where people started asking, not just what was happening, but whether it should be. Brooks ignored it. Or tried to. His focus narrowed. On the task. On the action. On ending the moment. He shifted his stance again, positioning himself to guide Naomi away from the entrance more directly. A subtle turn of his body. A tightening of space. A move that would make resistance irrelevant. "Last time," he said. And this time, there was no patience left in it. The courthouse doors opened wider than before. A soft mechanical sigh. But it cut through the tension like something sharper. A clerk stepped out. Young. Focused. Moving too fast for an ordinary morning. Her eyes scanned the steps quickly. Skipping faces. Skipping uniforms. Searching. "Excuse me," she called out. But Brooks didn't turn. "We're handling it," he said, his voice steady, controlled. The kind of control that assumed the situation was already understood. The clerk didn't slow. Her heels struck the stone faster now. More urgent. "Officer, wait." There was something in her voice. Not loud. Not forceful. But precise. Sharp enough to interrupt. Brooks's hand paused mid-motion. Not because he chose to. Because something in that tone didn't belong to interruption. He turned slightly. Just enough to acknowledge her. "We've got it under control," he said. Still certain. Still anchored in his version of the moment. The clerk stepped closer. Her eyes moved past him, and locked onto Naomi. And for a fraction of a second, everything changed. Her expression didn't shift dramatically. There was no sudden shock. No visible realization. Just stillness. The kind that comes when something finally aligns. And you understand, before you're ready to say it out loud. "Can you just hold on for a second?" she said, quieter now. More deliberate. Brooks frowned. "This is a restricted entrance. She can't just, you don't understand." The words weren't louder. But they landed differently. And for the first time, his certainty cracked. Not enough to break. But enough, to let something else in. Recognition didn't arrive all at once. It never did. It came in fragments. A pause that lasted half a second too long. A look that didn't move on when it should have. A detail that didn't fit the conclusion already made. The clerk's eyes stayed on Naomi. Longer than necessary. That was the first sign. Not confusion. Not doubt. Something quieter. Something closer to alignment. "Can you just, hold on for a moment," she said. Her voice had changed. Not louder. But more careful. Like each word needed to land exactly where it belonged. Brooks frowned slightly. "This is a restricted entrance," he said, more to reinforce his position than to explain it. "She can't just stand here." The clerk didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flicked down, then back up. Still on Naomi. Still searching. Not for permission. For confirmation. And in that silence, something in the moment shifted. Not outwardly. But underneath. Like a structure beginning to loosen. The wind moved lightly across the steps. Just enough. A single sheet slipped from the edge of Naomi's folder. It didn't fall sharply. It drifted. Turning once in the air before landing near Brooks's shoe. He didn't notice. He was still focused on the situation in front of him. Still anchored in the version of events he had already decided. The clerk saw it immediately. Her eyes dropped. Tracked it. She stepped forward without asking. Bent slightly. Picked it up. The paper was ordinary at first glance. Just another document. But the moment her eyes moved across the header, her posture changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her fingers tightened slightly at the edge. Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. Because recognition had just moved from possibility to certainty. She read the first line again. Slower this time. As if confirming that what she saw was exactly what she thought it was. Then she looked back up. At Naomi. And everything aligned. "What is your name, ma'am?" The question was different now. Not procedural. Not casual. Intentional. Naomi met her gaze. Steady. Unrushed. Naomi Carter. The name settled into the space between them. This time, it didn't pass through unnoticed. It landed. And stayed. The clerk's grip on the paper tightened slightly. Her eyes dropped back to it. Then lifted again. Then moved to Brooks. "This is today's docket," she said. Carefully. Measured. Brooks exhaled. A trace of impatience returning. And the clerk didn't look away. "Her name is listed at the top." A pause. Small. Fragile. But heavy. Brooks felt it before he understood it. Listed as what? His voice was quieter now. Less certain. The clerk held his gaze for one more second. Then said it. Clearly. Without emphasis. Presiding judge. Silence didn't fall. It spread. From one realization to another. The man with the phone lowered it slightly. Not because he chose to, because something about the moment made recording feel wrong. The woman on the steps took a step back. Inside the building, movement slowed. A conversation stopped mid-sentence. A chair shifted, then stilled. And then, from somewhere just beyond the doorway, a voice spoke. Clear. Automatic. Unquestioning. All rise. The words moved faster than understanding. Chairs scraped across the floor. Papers slipped from hands. Voices disappeared mid-word. And one by one, people stood. Not because they processed what had happened. Because the room itself demanded it. And in that moment, everything inverted. Because Naomi Carter was still standing at the entrance. Still being held. And yet, the entire courtroom was rising, for her. Brooks let go immediately. Not slowly. Not carefully. Instantly. Like his hand had touched something it shouldn't have. He stepped back. A half step at first. Then another. His posture shifting in small, uncertain ways. The structure he had relied on, was gone. Replaced by something he hadn't accounted for. I didn't realize, he said. The words felt smaller as they left him. Less controlled. Less certain. Naomi looked at him. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just clarity. It happens. No emphasis. No accusation. Just truth. And somehow, that made it heavier. Because there was nothing to argue with. Nothing to defend against. Only something to understand. She stepped forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just, forward. The doors opened fully this time. The air inside met her. Cooler. Stiller. Structured. The clerk moved beside her instinctively. Adjusting her pace. Falling into alignment. Your Honor, she said. The title didn't echo. It didn't need to. It settled exactly where it belonged. Naomi gave a small nod. And continued walking. Inside, people moved aside. Not consciously. Not all at once. But enough. Space opened. Voices lowered. Attention shifted. No announcement was made. No explanation offered. But the room understood. And at the back, Brooks stepped inside. Slower this time. Not as someone managing the space. But as someone entering it, for the first time. The courtroom didn't react loudly. It adjusted. That was the difference. Voices lowered, not all at once, but in layers. Chairs shifted slightly. Papers stilled in hands that had been mid-motion seconds before. Naomi walked forward without rushing. Measured. Aligned. Not claiming the space, but moving through it like it had already accepted her. The elevated bench stood at the front, framed by the seal on the wall, carrying a kind of quiet gravity that didn't need explanation. The clerk moved ahead, preparing the bench with practiced efficiency. Naomi reached the steps and paused, not from hesitation, but from precision. Then she stepped up. One step. Then another. Her folder rested on the surface in front of her. She didn't open it immediately. She let the room settle first. And the room responded. The first case was small. That was what most people would have said. A young man stood at the front, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Nervous. Eyes moving between the floor and the bench. First offense. Minor charge. The kind of case that moved quickly. Or got overlooked entirely. Naomi didn't rush. "State your name for the record," she said. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't command. It simply carried. The young man answered. Unsteady at first. Then clearer. She listened fully. Not interrupting. Not finishing his sentences for him. Not rushing him past his own explanation. At the side, an attorney adjusted his file, ready to move things along. Naomi raised a hand slightly. Not to stop him. Just to hold the moment. The young man explained what had happened. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But honestly. Naomi asked a question. Simple. Direct. Was this a pattern, or a moment? The room quieted slightly. Because the question shifted everything. It wasn't about the charge. It was about the person. The young man hesitated. Then answered. A moment. Naomi held his gaze for a second. Not long. Just enough. Accountability matters, she said. But so does context. Her ruling was measured. Firm enough to matter. Fair enough to stand. The young man nodded. Relief didn't show loudly. But it was there. Subtle. Real. At the back of the room, Brooks noticed. The second case moved differently. An attorney stepped forward, confident, controlled, prepared. Too prepared. His argument was structured. Clean. Precise. But it leaned. Slightly. Just enough to test the boundary of interpretation. He spoke smoothly. Confident that clarity would carry him. Naomi let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Didn't challenge early. She allowed the argument to exist fully. Then, she asked a question. 1. Simple. Where, exactly, in the statute are you deriving that interpretation? The attorney paused. Just briefly. Then answered. But the answer. Stretched. Not clean. Not anchored. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She let the silence sit. The kind of silence that exposes uncertainty. The attorney adjusted his stance. Added clarification. Then another. Each one moving slightly further from the original point. Naomi didn't raise her voice. Didn't push. She simply asked one more question. Is that your reading, or the court's? That was it. The structure collapsed. Not dramatically. Quietly. But completely. The room felt it. A shift. Respect deepening, not because she asserted authority. But because she didn't need to. At the back, Brooks felt it too. He stood near the back wall. Still. But not the same. His posture had changed. Not visibly to others. But internally, everything was shifting. He watched Naomi work. Not as someone to assess. Not as someone to manage. But as someone to understand. Outside, he controlled space. Inside, she defined it. Without force. Without urgency. Without needing to correct anyone loudly. That difference pressed against him. He replayed the moment at the entrance. The tone he used. The certainty he carried. The decision he made before asking. It didn't align anymore. Not with what he was seeing. Not with what he was beginning to understand. Authority, he realized, wasn't about stopping movement. It was about guiding it. And he had done the opposite. He considered staying where he was. Letting the moment pass. Letting the realization remain internal. Unspoken. That would have been easier. Cleaner. Safer. But it didn't settle. It stayed. Pressed. Not loudly. But persistently. Each time Naomi spoke. Each time the room aligned with her without effort. Each time he saw the difference between control and clarity. He shifted his weight. Looked toward the aisle. Then back to the bench. Then down briefly. There was no instruction for this. No protocol. No training. Just a moment that required something he hadn't practiced. And then, he stepped forward. Your Honor. The words didn't interrupt. They entered. The room stilled, not out of shock, but awareness. Something outside the usual order was about to happen. Naomi lifted her gaze. Not sharply. Not surprised. Just attentive. Brooks stood a few steps from the front. Not too close. Not out of place. Just within the moment. I made an assumption, he said. No explanation. No justification. The words were placed carefully. Like he understood their weight now. I didn't ask who you were. A pause. Not long. But enough. And I acted before I understood. The room held still. No one moved. No one spoke. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She let the silence exist. Let the words settle. Let them carry what they needed to carry, without interruption. Brooks continued. That was my mistake. No defense. No softening. Just acknowledgement. Naomi held his gaze for 1 second longer. Then nodded. Thank you, officer. Her voice didn't elevate the moment. Didn't diminish it. It placed it exactly where it belonged. And then, she moved on. The case resumed. The structure returned. But something had shifted. Not in the room. In him. When the session ended, the room didn't break. It transitioned. Chairs moved. Papers gathered. Voices returned gradually. Not loud. Not abrupt. Just enough to signal the shift back to motion. Naomi closed her folder. Stood. And stepped down from the bench. No one rushed her. No one needed to. The space adjusted. As it had before. As it always had. Brooks remained where he was. Watching. Not waiting. Not expecting. Just, aware. She moved toward the side exit. The door opened softly. Light shifted. And for a brief moment, their paths aligned. Naomi looked at him. Not to revisit the moment. Not to reinforce it. Just to acknowledge that it had happened. Brooks met her gaze. And this time, there was no uncertainty in it. Only understanding. He gave a small nod. She returned it. Just as simply. And then, she was gone. The door closed. The room continued. But the moment remained. Not visible. Not spoken. But fully there. Settled. Complete.